Hi, everyone. Welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Chelsea, and I'm the Senior Growth Manager here at LiNK. That means I get to plan events like this to connect our incredible supporters like you all over the world and work to bring more awesome people into this movement. I'm so excited to have LiNK CEO Hannah Song and our South Korea Country Director Sokeel Park joining me as well. Today, we'll be talking about what's going on in and around North Korea, how the pandemic has continued to affect LiNK's work, and some changes to our programs. We'll also have a chance to hear about some of the impact you made possible in 2021, and we'll get a glimpse of some of the things coming down the line this year. Just in case this is your first time joining a LiNK event, first of all, welcome. We're so happy to have you. But I'd like to quickly just share a little bit about who we are. Liberty in North Korea is an international NGO working with the North Korean people to achieve their freedom. We help North Korean refugees escape through a 3,000-mile secret rescue route and have been able to help over 1,300 North Korean refugees and their children safely escape and begin new lives in South Korea and the United States. We also focus on building the capacity of North Korean defectors to be agents of change and work on strategies to provide information and technology to North Koreans inside the country. Ultimately, we are mobilizing an international movement of allies to advocate and support for the North Korean people until we achieve liberty in North Korea. At the end of this event, there's going to be some time for Q&A, so feel free throughout the event to start dropping your questions in. My colleague Stephanie is in there in the chat, chatting with you guys. She'll be pulling some of your questions and dropping them in so Hannah and Sokeel can answer them. To start off, we'd love to know where you guys are calling from. We know we have people all over the world typically at these events, so please go ahead and in the chat, let us know where you're calling from. I'm currently at LiNK's headquarters office here in Long Beach, California. So we can go ahead and jump into things. Sokeel, welcome, good morning. Thank you for joining us from Seoul. I know it's early there. I know it's a little bit off topic, but we had talked yesterday and you were sharing a bit about Ukraine, and I thought you had a really interesting perspective. So I was hoping you could share a bit on that since it's something that probably we're all thinking about before you really jump into the topic of North Korea.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Chelsea. Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining. So, as you said, Ukraine is not the main discussion today, but it has been top of mind. I don't think just for me, I think for a lot of people. And so I thought maybe we can talk a little bit about how it relates to the broader world and also to today's discussion. I think for starters, when we see the images, stories, and news coming from Ukraine, the most important thing that we can see there is just how important freedom from tyranny and oppression is. We're reminded how important the safety of families is and how important it is for those who can to help. We're reminded that even when complex geopolitics are in play, the most important thing is the ordinary people worrying about whether they'll be okay tomorrow. The mothers concerned about their sons, fathers worried that they won't be able to be around to watch their daughters grow up. Children being traumatized and innocent lives cut short. Just the ordinary people willing to die for a freedom that for those of us born with it, it's probably so easy to take for granted. And when we see Ukrainians fearing for their lives, leaving their homes and crossing into Poland and other countries, we're even more convinced of the need to support people everywhere around the world who are forced to leave everything behind for freedom and safety. When we see how propaganda and misinformation is used to manipulate people and create false realities to justify abuse and domination, I think we're reminded of the need to support all people's fight against propaganda and support their access to a free flow of information. And lastly, when we see powerful images of ordinary Ukrainians caught up in this conflict and their stories are heard around the world, we're reminded of the need not just to sympathize with their suffering, but to reinforce their resilience, to not just hear their hope, but to believe in their hope and to do what we can to empower it. And the last few days, I think it's been inspiring for me to see not just the strength and resilience of Ukrainian people, but to see the world respond and begin to stand up in solidarity with them as well. So, I think the world may feel like a dark place recently, and it has been for so many people in so many places. But if working with North Korean people for about 10 years now has taught me anything, it's that even in the darkness, no matter how difficult things are, there's always light. If you look at the people in those situations, if you hear their stories, then there's always people fighting for a better future, and there's always a way to help. So I apologize for that digression, but again, it's been on top of mind. So I thought maybe it's good to just address that directly at the top. But I should get back to what we were supposed to be talking about, North Korea and how things are going there, especially with the pandemic. So first of all, the North Korean government has had a typically extreme and paranoid response to the pandemic, locking down their borders very tightly and allowing almost no trade or physical contact with the outside world. We saw an extreme and tragic example of this when a South Korean fisheries official who ended up in the West Sea drifting towards North Korea was identified by a North Korean Coast Guard boat, but was actually, instead of being saved out of the water, was executed and his body was burned at sea, supposedly because of the risk of coming into contact with any South Korean person during the pandemic. Most foreigners have left North Korea, leaving very few diplomats and embassies still functioning in Pyongyang. And on top of all of that, the authorities have increased restrictions, not just on the border, but on internal movement inside North Korea as well. For instance, from one part of the province to the other part. In terms of the pandemic, the North Korean government still claims 0 cases, but most analysts think that that's implausible. There were multiple credible reports of cases early on in the pandemic, but it does seem that nonetheless, with this level of isolation and restriction internally, they probably would have been able to control the pandemic and prevent widespread or ongoing transmission, but at a huge cost. As you would expect, imposing this level of isolation and internal restrictions has been devastating for trade and the market economy, which basically all North Koreans depend on. In the past 2 years, we've heard reports of shortages of basic necessities, things like soap and cooking oil, and shortages and price volatility in even basic foodstuffs that would leave the most poorest North Koreans very vulnerable to malnutrition. At the same time, the North Korean government has actually refused to accept humanitarian aid, food relief that it's been offered, because they seem to be concerned that the virus might come in with assistance. And then it's difficult to know how widespread this might be, but over the past year, we've also heard multiple credible reports of deaths from starvation happening again inside North Korea. And I'm in Seoul right now, I'm in South Korea, we're close to North Korea, and it's just kind of unbelievable. It's incredible to think that North Korean people might be going through so much hardness and living such different and difficult lives so close to here. Meanwhile, even during the pandemic, the North Korean government has prioritized increasing even more the crackdowns and punishments on foreign media and small acts of cultural resistance inside the country, while the country is even more closed than before. Again, there have been credible reports of executions of people being killed by the state for the so-called crime of watching and sharing South Korean media. This shows not just where the regime's priorities lie, but also that they recognize that these phenomena and social changes driven by North Korean people are a threat to their authority and control in the long term. But Kim Jong-un himself has actually admitted how difficult things have become in North Korea, including referencing the food shortages. And there was a video of him crying during a speech in Pyongyang where he acknowledged that. But at the same time, literally within the same few days, satellite imagery revealed that a massive water slide was being installed at his East Coast mansion in Wonsan. And that seems ridiculous and almost like a joke, but it's important that we don't become numb to how fundamentally outrageous that is. So overall, things were already very difficult. This issue has been difficult for a long time. North Korean people have been facing massive challenges for a long time. But some activists have started calling this the new dark age of North Korea. North Korean people face even more hardship than before. And it's also even more difficult than before to know what's going on inside. And this may not be a short-term thing, unfortunately. The North Korean government is still refusing to accept offers of vaccines from the international community through COVAX. And there doesn't seem to be prospects for getting out of this level of isolation and lockdown in the near future. Meanwhile, with everything that's going on in the US and around the world, if anything, I think that we've seen a fall off of interest in this issue around the world, except, of course, for everybody on this call.
Thank you so much for sharing, Sokeel. I remember reading about that massive water slide being built and feeling just so frustrated, but now it really puts it in context to understand that we're entering this new dark age, and it's just really something I find so heartbreaking. And so I think you shared a bit about things being really tough for North Koreans who are still in the country. Could you share a little bit about what the situation is currently like for North Korean refugees who are no longer inside the country?
Yeah, sure. So with the lockdown on the border that I mentioned and the massively increased difficulty for North Koreans to not just get out of their country, but also to travel through China because of the unprecedented levels of restrictions there as well. We've seen North Korean refugee arrivals to South Korea, as you see in this graph, basically fall off a cliff in the pandemic. It was already becoming more difficult in the Kim Jong-un era. You see that graph going down even before the pandemic. But in 2019, the last year before the start of the pandemic and this level of restriction, there were about, I think, 1,047, just over 1,000 North Koreans who made it to South Korea. That dropped to 229 in 2020. And then last year, just 63 people. That's 23 women and 40 males. Last year, that was actually the first time in 2 decades that there were more males than females arriving in South Korea. And that's because a lot of these traditional routes have become so difficult, and a significant proportion of this small number that have been able to come were already in third countries. So for instance, North Korean men working in Russia, and some of them able to escape and defect from there. For the North Korean women who are already in China and may have been there for years, North Korean refugees, we hear that the COVID measures are making their lives even more restricted than before. Because of their illegal status, it's very difficult for them to get identity and papers in China. You can imagine that that makes it very difficult for them to be able to show QR codes or proof of vaccination, or even get vaccinated in the first place. And because they're even more stuck than before with no way to escape, and because people know that, we've heard that some North Korean women face even worse treatment from their Chinese husbands that they've been sold to than before. Of the North Koreans that are here in South Korea, because of the restrictions in North Korea and in the border areas in particular, many are no longer able to stay in contact with their families through broken networks, even people that were able to be in contact before the pandemic. So for them, it's even more difficult to know how their families are doing as things get worse inside North Korea. It's more difficult to send money or any kind of assistance home as well. Some North Koreans in South Korea still are able to maintain contact and send money, and that's so crucial, but it's become so much more difficult and expensive. In addition, those resettling here during the pandemic, those few who have come recently, report facing greater loneliness. And you can imagine that if you left everything behind and you're starting a new life in a new society these days, this time with increased social distancing, how difficult it might be to find and build a new community. So loneliness is an increased challenge. There's a lot of stuff that can't be done online or over Zoom like this. So for North Koreans inside and outside the country overall, it's been even tougher than usual. And unfortunately, there's just no way to sugarcoat that.
Just to be honest, this has been one of the most discouraging things for me during this pandemic. I've also had the privilege of working on this issue for over 10 years. And this is the first time that we've reached a point where we really haven't been able to help North Korean refugees in the field because of all these border shutdowns and all these other challenges. And it's just really hard for me to imagine how many people haven't had the chance to start their new lives in freedom because of the circumstances of these last 2 years and just that lost time. A hard thing, a hard pill to swallow, I think, for a lot of us. Just as a quick reminder to everyone at home, if you do have any questions about anything Sokeel asked or anything Sokeel shared, feel free to drop them in the chat. We're going to do a Q&A at the end, so feel free to send those in and we'll be pulling from them. Hannah, we want to switch over to you now. Could you talk about how what Sokeel has just shared is going to impact LiNK's programs and how it's already impacted what we do and especially our work in the field?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, hi, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us today. I know that what Sokeel just shared can seem really disheartening, and especially about the situation on the ground for North Korean refugees. I know that that's a part of the work that many of you here are so passionate and care deeply about as well. And it is very difficult and heart-wrenching to think about how bad things are right now. I mean, worse than it's been at any point since we've been working on this issue for almost 2 decades. But to be honest, this new dark age has motivated us to really work even harder because what we do now matters even more. So since 2010, we've been able to help over 1,300 North Korean refugees and their children reach freedom through our secret rescue routes. And over the years, as we've invested in strategic relationships on the ground and we've created safe and sustainable rescue routes, we've steadily been able to increase the number of North Korean refugees that we were able to help year over year. But what's crazy is that just 2 years ago, we were helping hundreds of North Korean refugees escape every year. But this pandemic has brought our rescue work to a complete halt last year. So this is all the more reason for us to really celebrate the one person that we were able to help in 2021 reach freedom, and to realize just how amazing and precious it is for this young man who made it to the US and has been able to begin a new life. The pandemic has not only impacted our rescues, but naturally, of course, post-resettlement efforts then, since so few people are arriving in South Korea and in the US for resettlement over the last 2 years. And we saw that reflected in the numbers that Sokeel was sharing earlier. But we were still able to provide resettlement support last year to about 68 North Korean refugees in South Korea and in the US. And we were able to celebrate some pretty amazing milestones. So of just the North Koreans here in the US, 2 of our North Korean friends actually became US citizens. 2 sisters graduated from high school. 1 young woman started graduate school to get her master's in marriage and family therapy. A young couple, they purchased their first home here. And one of the young women who participated in our entrepreneurship program in 2020 actually opened up her first business last year, which was pretty exciting to see. But with fewer and fewer North Koreans who are escaping, it's become even more important than to work within the community of defectors who have already escaped, and to invest much more in programs that go beyond just resettlement support. So one of the biggest opportunities moving forward is to invest in and to build the capacity of the North Korean defector community and to really cultivate more leaders and agents of change for this issue. You know, a consistently reported challenge that we hear from North Korean defectors is that English language ability is so critical in South Korea, especially both for educational and career opportunities, and also to achieve its success. So there's really an undeniable value in more North Korean defectors being able to share their stories, their voices, and their perspectives in English with people around the world. So in response to this need, we successfully were able to develop and launch a new English language program last year in South Korea. And we served 71 North Korean students through this program. And we actually had over 70 volunteers and teachers who were working with us to support the success of this program over the course of 17 weeks. So this was really over 2 programs that we did, 2 sessions of the program. So by the way, if you are based in South Korea and you're interested in getting involved and being part of this program, be sure to check out our Instagram, our social media for more information on how you can join and volunteer. On the US side, we piloted a mentorship program with 4 North Korean students, and we were able to connect them with incredible mentors who were able to provide guidance and support in the fields of computer science, counseling and therapy, and finance and accounting. So similarly, if you're interested in opportunities to get involved in this program, stay tuned as well. So by developing programs like this, we can really help build the capacity of this community and cultivate more North Koreans as agents of change who can play a critical role in working together with us and helping to accelerate change. Lastly, I really wanted to share a few quick updates on the work that we're doing in labs, which is one of my favorite areas of our work. And it's an area of work that really focuses on developing strategies to provide North Koreans inside the country with access to more information and technology. And again, this resonates so deeply, especially with what Sokeel shared at the top here, especially with what's going on in Ukraine and with the significance of the significant role that propaganda can play, especially in closed and authoritarian places like North Korea. And so although this is an area where we are limited in what we can share publicly, we will definitely share what we can without compromising the work that we're doing here. So last year, we were able to convene 3 virtual closed-door summits, bringing together North Korean defectors and practitioners, researchers from the US, Europe, and from Asia. And we brought everybody together to discuss emerging trends, to be able to showcase new technologies and research, to identify areas for collaboration, and to be able to increase the community's understanding and learning from North Korean defectors. We also successfully partnered with RFA, Radio Free Asia, in creating a 10-episode vlog series about the everyday lives of 5 young North Koreans now living in South Korea. And this series was made with a North Korean audience in mind. With some pending hardware projects from last year really heading into this year, we're really excited to welcome a director of labs onto the team who recently joined us and will be working with us to expand our work in this area and to help us scale our impact.
Thank you for those updates, Hannah. It's been really exciting to see how we're investing more into building the capacity of the North Korean defector community and also into these projects in labs that are ultimately going to help accelerate change inside the country. I wanted to shift a little bit to talk about another really critical part of the work that we're doing here at LiNK, changing the narrative and the way people see North Korea. I don't think anybody here is surprised to know that when the average person thinks about North Korea, the first thing that comes to mind is Kim Jong-un or nuclear weapons. Rarely is it human rights or refugees or about the North Korean people, their incredible resiliency, and the ways they're changing their own country. All of you on this call have been a vital partner and ally in this work and in this part of our work very specifically. You guys have helped change the narrative within your own communities and amongst your friends and families. And one of the things that inspires me the most is this movement of international support for the North Korean people. This includes 140 LiNK chapters in 18 countries around the world. I imagine a lot of them represented here today. And last year, many of you joined us in a letter writing campaign here in the US that demanded the US government make the North Korean people a bigger concern in its policy on North Korea and focused more on human rights in North Korea as well. You sent over 1,200 letters to members of Congress during that campaign, and you guys can still do that if you're interested. I think Stephanie is going to drop that link in the chat to direct you over to where you can send a letter. Last year, we also had over 2.7 million views on our videos on YouTube, and we produced and launched 14 videos that shared the stories of escapes, how North Korean refugees are sending money back home, and even a really fun series called The Fresh Prince of Pyongyang. We also launched a narrative film called Watching that provides an alternative perspective on the challenges that the North Korean people face. So definitely be sure to check those out. We continue to work with international media on changing the narrative on North Korea, and we were quoted and cited over 30 times in major media. Some of our former LiNK advocacy fellows were featured in places like the BBC, the Financial Times, and even on the front page of the LA Times. You guys might have seen us on Selena and Chef on HBO Max, thanks to our friend, Chef Esther Choi. She chose us as her charity and talked a bit about our work in her episode while she was teaching Selena Gomez how to cook Korean barbecue. We're really committed to continuing our work to change the narrative on North Korea internationally, and especially in South Korea, where there's so much potential for people to get involved, but the issue has been just extremely politicized for so long. So there's really a critical need to introduce a new framework and a more humanized perspective on the issue. Even with the pandemic, we were able to successfully launch a new program in South Korea that brought together young North Koreans and young South Koreans to cultivate them as youth activists, working together for this issue and building a new model of activism that we think is really crucial in helping to garner the level of support that the North Korean people deserve. And although this last year was a whirlwind, to say the least, I am so proud of everything we were able to accomplish. Hannah, I'm sure everyone on this call is wondering, after hearing all of this, what 2022 is going to look like. What's coming up in this next year?
Yes. Well, 2022 is going to be amazing. It's been really difficult on the ground, of course. And the thing to remember, though, is that North Korean refugees haven't given up, and neither have we. So we're continuing our reconnaissance work on the ground to diversify our routes and to try to find new methods to help North Korean refugees reach safety. I see in the chat that there's a lot of people asking about different creative ways and ideas that we can do that, and thank you for that. Our field team has really been focusing on this during the pandemic and has constantly been looking for and trying out new ways in which we can safely reach and help North Koreans to escape. We will do everything we can to move people again as soon as possible, and we look forward to being able to provide some positive updates on that again soon. In terms of North Korean refugees who have already resettled in the US and in South Korea, there really is so much potential and opportunity for us to continue building capacity within this community and cultivating more agents of change who will work with us on this issue. So this year, we're going to be expanding our mentorship program, and we will also be relaunching our Advocacy Fellows program, which will now be fully based in the US. We'll continue to scale our English language program in South Korea. And we are also going to be looking to launch a series of capacity building workshops and also scholarships in both the US and in South Korea, which will provide support to North Korean agents of change to be able to fulfill their potential and to work with us on this issue. With the addition of our new director of labs, which I mentioned before, we'll continue to work on some really key projects and strategies around developing content for North Korean audiences, new technologies to increase access to foreign media and information inside the country, and also working to develop ways to improve digital security for North Koreans, again, who are inside of the country. And finally, this summer, I hope I'm not stealing your thunder, Chelsea, but Chelsea will be leading the relaunch of our movement with a very audacious goal of mobilizing millions of allies around the world to stand together with the North Korean people and with us in our pursuit of freedom. So I hope that you will join us and will be part of this very exciting movement.
Thanks so much, Hannah. No, I'm so excited for what is to come this year, and just really excited that we get to work with the best supporters. Not that I'm biased or anything, but really excited for all the people in this call to be a part of that. But thank you so much, Hannah and Sokeel, obviously, for all of your insights and updates. We've been getting a ton of really great questions coming in, so we want to switch over to some time for Q&A so we can try and get as many questions in as we can. So to kick it off, this is a question from, a question from Jacob Eliasoff to kick it off. This is for Sokeel. Could we look at the increased difficulty of defection as a reason to focus more on non-defection ways of helping North Koreans? So flow of information. I think a lot of what Hannah was talking about with labs, potentially supporting Black markets, remittances, et cetera.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Jacob. That's a good question. And I absolutely agree. I think that we agree. This is something that we've been looking at and working on. And, as Hannah mentioned, maybe more quietly than some other areas. These are areas where, even just information about the projects, the existence of the projects, getting out there may be a problem, may compromise the project itself. And so operational security is extremely important. However, as Hannah shared, we have just hired a director of labs to really scale up and expand our work in that area. She is an expert in her own right. We're really pleased to have her join us. It's absolutely crucial. It's an area, in terms of increasing North Korean people's access to information and foreign media, that North Korean defectors themselves consistently say is one of the most effective ways to accelerate change inside the country. The need is massive, the opportunity is massive. There are challenges to executing some parts of those things with the pandemic as well, with the increased border security and the more difficult operating environment in other countries as well. But nonetheless, this is an area where we are working on, and we're really pleased that we can, with your support, build our efforts in this area as well.
Definitely. And kind of to piggyback on that, there's a question here from Vanessa asking, how is it possible to monitor these internal changes happening in North Korea, especially with borders being even more restricted than ever before?
Yeah, well, Vanessa, that's a great question as well. This has always been a big challenge for people working on this issue, and it's become even more so, as you mentioned, with the pandemic. We can try to get as much insight and intel from North Korean defectors as possible. That, as we've talked about in recent times, has become more difficult because most of the most recent North Korean defectors that we might be able to meet and talk with left in 2019, just before the pandemic. There are some other ways of getting information out of North Korea. There were, other organizations that we, have good relationships with as well, and we can, kind of share information and so on. In normal times, sometimes it's possible to get insight from foreigners who have access to, getting in on the ground and seeing how some aspects of North Korea might be changing, the things that foreigners can see and access. But that's become more difficult, but I don't think that will be impossible forever. So basically, the challenge has increased. It was already difficult to know, but some of those data points that we used to have been taken off the table. And so we just need to step up to that challenge, and work with partners, work with North Korean refugees, work with people, family members in South Korea who are in contact still with people inside North Korea, and learn as much as we can. And when we can, we will share, like we are doing today, with you guys as well, with our supporters.
Great, thanks. Hannah, this next question is for you. It's kind of something I think we're all talking about and aware of. And so it seems like the international community is kind of turned its focus off of North Korea right now. I think the last couple of years there's just been so much going on in the world. And so how does LiNK feel about that? And how does LiNK plan to get people to re-engage with this issue and get the international community's attention again?
Yeah, well, thanks for that question, Vanessa. And I think we touched on that a little bit in some of the things that we talked about we're hoping to do this year. I think there's two parts to this question. In general, in terms of just government's response to North Korea, I think one of the things that we've strongly advocated for and will continue to do so, I think we may have dropped the link in the chat earlier, but we did a letter writing campaign last year because one of the things that we really want to continue to emphasize is the importance of really making the North Korean people a bigger concern in any policy that has to do with North Korea. And so the emphasis of that letter writing campaign was really around that. And so I really encourage all of you who maybe didn't have a chance to participate in that to check that out and to be sure to send letters to members of Congress or to contact folks within your government to make sure that this continues to be a very important priority, which is again just making sure that the North Korean people are a much bigger part of any policy and any ways that governments are engaging with or dealing with North Korea. But on the other side of that, as I had mentioned, one of the really big initiatives that Chelsea will be leading this year is sort of this revival of our grassroots movement, you can say. I think historically for LiNK, we're an organization that was started by college students. And so we believe so much in the grassroots movement. We believe so much in all of our students and chapters, and obviously all of our supporters all over the world, whoever you may be, even if you're not students. But that's really been the backbone of this movement. And we're looking forward to really relaunching, reviving that this year. This summer in particular. And hopefully we have this huge goal. We want to really build a groundswell of excitement and energy and attention on this issue. To be honest, North Korea, the North Korean people, they do not have nearly as much attention as they deserve, considering the size of this issue. And so this is really something that we're going to be working on doing. And I hope that I can count on all of you who are here to join us and to be part of that, and to also help us by bringing people in from your communities, from your networks, introducing them to this issue, sharing the stories of the North Korean people, and joining the movement.
Awesome. We are very excited for all of that to come. Sokeel, kind of shifting gears, but another question for you, this one from Essie Scholl. Would you say that the current situation in North Korea is comparable to that of the famine in the 90s?
It has been very worrying to see North Korean people themselves, North Koreans inside the country who are in contact with family members that we know outside, starting to make those comparisons, actually, starting to reference the famine in the 1990s that, of a population of 20 million North Koreans at the time, caused the deaths of, it's estimated up to 1 million people. Is one of the worst famines of the 20th century. It doesn't seem like overall things are that bad or that widespread as it was through the 90s, through that whole period. The very fact that people are even, being triggered to remember that does show the thing, just how worse things have become just in the last couple of years. There was even a reference that caught a lot of analysts by surprise by Kim Jongun himself as well to the term, the arduous march, which can refer to a couple of different things in North Korea, but you can't say that in North Korea without making people think of the famine. So for Kim Jong-un to use that term as well, it shows that this is being recognized at all levels of North Korean society. Overall, I think that North Korean people and the market economy, even though it has been so badly affected by these restrictions and by the crackdowns on not just trade, but smuggling as well, even though it's taken a big hit, I think that there's a lot more resiliency in the food economy, in the food kind of marketized economy inside North Korea, so that North Korean people wouldn't get to the same level that we saw in the 1990s. That's not to say that it's not bad, though. You know, things are really concerning, and we hope that things can get better. You know, some of the trade can resume, and things can open up as soon as possible.
This leads actually into another question, maybe a couple questions I'm going to merge into one. One I see here is from Rachel Friedland asking, how are North Korean people getting things like food and fuel and water? So I think you touched on that a bit, but maybe elaborate there. And then the other part of that question is, are people on the outside able to send money back to their family still in North Korea for those basic needs? So I know those are like two disjointed questions, but I think you could answer them together.
Sure. So in terms of North Koreans getting basic necessities like food, water, and fuel, I think it was, a lot of that would be, you know, kind of produced inside North Korea. You know, there is farming, there's the, you know, kind of collectivized farming, but North Koreans do kind of private, off the books farming as well. You know, it's kind of like garden farming, or even, you know, some people try and produce stuff on the tops of hills or on balconies even, using whatever resources or whatever space they can get to produce their own resources, their own food and so on. You know, water supply doesn't tend to be a massive problem. In some areas, maybe a supply of clean water, you know, sanitation and health and so on in some of the poorer rural areas. In terms of fuel, again, there's, you know, people use wood. There's a lot of deforestation from that inside North Korea. There's quite a lot of coal mining that happens in North Korea as well. Generally for the North Korean economy, there is, though, a lot of reliance on trade with China, especially for you know, more produced things. So North Korea tends to export raw materials and import more produced goods, and, you know, a wider array of things that might be necessary. So there are different ways that people can get access to goods, you know, inside the country, but with these, you know, lockdowns on the border, stuff that people rely on getting stuff, you know, from China or the outside world, those have gone into shortage, as a kind of reference. And with shortages, the prices go up. It means that people can't afford them, or even if they, you know, have money, they may just not be able to find them. They're just, you know, they're not on the shelves, kind of thing. You know, they're not available in the markets. So yeah, it is a challenge even for basic necessities. And then, sorry, there was a follow-up question, which was about remittances and how people send money and information. So we actually have a video that we produced with some of our North Korean friends last year. That was one of the media pieces that we put out at the end of last year. And so maybe we can provide that if we've not already in the chat. The short version is that North Koreans in South Korea who are able to reestablish contact with their family in North Korea through broken networks. So it's Chinese mobile phones that are smuggled into North Korea and can be used in the border region. If you're close enough to China inside North Korea, you can pick up the Chinese mobile phone signal. That means that you can be sending text messages, you can have direct phone calls even. Some people use WeChat on Chinese smartphones, you know, kind of an equivalent of WhatsApp, or, you know, so many functions on it, to be honest. With that contact, people send money to bank accounts in China that are controlled by brokers who are already inside North Korea. That's the simple version. You can then send a remittance order to the broker who's in North Korea, tell them that you've sent $2,000, for instance, and that you want it to go to your mother. And they'll already have the cash typically inside North Korea, and they'll be able to send, you know, pass that off in money. You know, just know that they have the money in their account in China so that they can hand off the money inside North Korea. That has become more difficult as a lot of the trade and movement between North Korea and China has shut down. And a lot of those brokers, especially the smaller brokers, would have been squeezed out of that business, running out of cash that they can dispense inside North Korea. And so we see that some people are just not able to send remittances anymore. And a lot of people report that the cost of sending that money has increased so much. So, we hear of commission rates of 50% or even as high as 70%. So if you're sending $1,000 to your family in North Korea, the broker may be taking $500 or $700. Still, some people will send money because even $300 or $500 would be so important to their family in North Korea.
Awesome. Thank you. I think that is a question people ask all the time. And so definitely advise watching that remittances piece that we created this year. It really lays things out in a really easy to understand way. I've sent it to friends of mine that are always asking me that. So definitely check that out. Hannah, I think we have time for a couple more questions. So we have a question for you from Keith. And I wanted to rephrase this a little bit, but I think the question that we get asked often is, what does LiNK see as the potential solution to this issue? We talk about liberty in North Korea. We talk about the North Korean people being free, but what is the most likely scenario to bring this around? What does LiNK foresee as a solution to this issue, for lack of a better word?
This is, well, thanks for that question, Keith. It's a simple one. No, I'm just kidding. I'm going to invite Sokeel to also jump in if he has anything that he wants to add in here as well. I don't think that there is a simple solution. Of course, there is no silver bullet solution when it comes to North Korea. And I think more than anything else, it's really, it is an incredibly complex and challenging issue. But the area where we have seen the most potential for change, and an area where we see opportunity to see progress, is really in the ways in which the North Korean people inside the country are actually helping to change North Korea from the ground up, from the inside out. And so I think that's really, at least for us here at LiNK, our theory of change. The reason why we work on the areas that we do is because it's so strategically focused on where we think that we can contribute to accelerating these types of changes that we see happening. Nobody knows what the end goal, what's going to happen at the end, right? And I think that even for us as an organization, our goal is to really come alongside the North Korean people, to work with them, to empower them with whether it's information and technology and resources, for them to be able to determine their own future, to be in a place where they can determine their own future, whatever that may look like, whatever it is that they want that to look like. So in the interim, then what does that mean for us? Well, that's why we're focusing on things like developing capacity within the community of defectors, because by doing so and helping them to be more empowered as agents of change working on this issue, by achieving their own definitions of success, they can send more money and information into the country by keeping in touch with their family members. And that's a really critical input that's helping to accelerate changes inside. We're working closely with them in terms of understanding other opportunities and ways that we can reach people inside. We're working in labs on trying to figure out what kinds of information would be valuable, would be useful, to be able to send inside for the North Korean people inside to have access to, what types of technology and tools would be helpful for them. And again, all of these things really contributing to opportunities for ways that we see change happening, we see opportunities for progress, and there's a role for us to play in really accelerating those types of inputs to see bigger, broader change and to hopefully see a more open North Korea. But again, all of that change ultimately needing to be driven by the North Korean people. That's what we fundamentally believe. And so that's why all of our work really focuses on the North Korean people and around sort of that approach, and really trying to also bring greater awareness, attention, changing the narrative internationally, not just amongst the grassroots movement and amongst supporters around the world and in building this movement, but also to various governments and the way they engage with North Korea. Again, going back to the fact that the North Korean people need to be a bigger part of, it needs to be a bigger part of whatever their approach on North Korea is. There needs to be a much more holistic approach on North Korea, and not just one that's focused solely on security, on nuclear issues, not even just on humanitarian issues. You know, it is something that must be inclusive and more holistic altogether.
Sokeel, did you want to share anything?
Yeah, sure. This is something that we think a lot about and we discuss a lot. And I know that our team is going to be producing some content about this as well. And so you guys can look out for that, that's hopefully explaining better our theory of change in different ways. I think that there's going to be a blog post, there's going to be emails, I think maybe later in the year, maybe even a video as well. Hannah shared a lot of the key points there. I think that the fundamental thing is that even though it often seems like the North Korean government is completely in control because the human rights violations are so extreme, they're not completely in control. There is change happening inside North Korea. There is resistance in different forms, and a challenge posed to the North Korean government inside the country, and there is a force of change. Now, the difficult thing is that it's often not that visible, but if you talk with North Korean refugees a lot and you see the different patterns that are emerging and the way that North Korean society is changing, the way that North Korean people's thinking is changing, you see that there is a force of change growing inside the country, which is making it difficult for the North Korean government. I think that you see that even in, as we were talking up at the top, even during the pandemic, when they face this massive challenge, they choose to crack down on foreign media and North Koreans using slang and terms that they pick up from South Korean videos and so on. It's because it's a problem for them. It's because it's a challenge to them, and it's a force of change that kind of comes up against their authority. And so in the long term, our role, I think, is to try and do what we can to increase that force of change, to give the North Korean people a stronger hand in their efforts to change their country, whether it be at a small micro level in their own lives or a slightly bigger level in their communities and so on. Ultimately, I don't think that we'll be able to predict the future, when certain things will happen or exactly how things will play out. But if we look at human history, we look at other countries, we see that things that seem impossible suddenly become inevitable in a very short amount of time. And so our role as an organization, as supporters of working with North Korean people, is to try and increase that force of change to bring forward that day when that bigger change would happen and all North Korean people achieve their freedom.
Thank you both so much for sharing all of that. We are about to hit time. So just one quick last question that I think we got from a few different people, Joe LiNK, S.E. Schul, asking, what can people do to get involved? They want to do something for the North Korean people. They want to do something for the cause. What are some ways people can get involved?
Is that for you, Chelsea?
Oh, is that for you, Chelsea?
I know. I was like, it's weird to ask myself a question. Did you guys have anything you wanted to jump in? Otherwise, sure.
Why don't you answer it?
Sure. Obviously, there's tons of ways that different people can get involved depending on what you're interested in, what you have at your disposal. Obviously, as we talked about this summer, we're going to be relaunching our movement in new and really exciting ways. And so I would say make sure you are on our email list. Make sure you're following us on social. You don't want to miss some of these announcements coming. And if you're on our email list, that's the easiest #1 way to make sure that you are going to catch that. It's also how you're going to learn about events like these. If you're interested in starting a chapter at your school, in your community, if you and a group of friends wants to do your part in your neighborhood to change the narrative, to bring the stories of the North Korean people to the forefront of people's minds, reach out to us. You go to our website, there's an easy form you can fill out, and Esther Park, my colleague, will reach out to you about starting a chapter on your campus. Obviously, all of our social platforms, share, watch videos, comment, talk to people about it. I think those are really like the key basic ways to make sure that you're doing your part to help the North Korean people and to stand alongside them, as what Hannah and Sokeel were saying, as we watch this future unfold and as we watch them really change their country and see a free North Korea one day. So those are some really key ways to get involved. Hannah, I'm going to pass it over to you for a second.
Yeah, thank you so much, Shel. So I, really wanted to just wrap things up here and just to end by saying a huge, huge thank you to all of you. To our supporters, to our friends. Thank you so much for always remembering and believing in the North Korean people, for supporting our vision here at Liberty in North Korea, and for giving so generously of your time and attention and resources to support the work that we're doing together here at LiNK. So we are very grateful for all of you and for the many ways in which you truly inspire and encourage us and bring so much hope to not only us, but also to our North Korean friends as well. So thank you all so much. And I'm excited that for the impact we are going to have this year together because of your ongoing support.
Yes, thank you so much, Hannah. This has been awesome. Thank you guys so much for joining. This is where we're going to wrap up. Like I mentioned, follow us on all of our socials. I think Stephanie's going to drop those in the chat. Obviously, we have Instagram and Twitter, but you can actually join us on our brand new TikTok. We're pretty excited to explore that space. So follow us over there. If you want to become a part of our Liberty community and give monthly, this is a way to give sustainably and to really ensure that we can keep doing what we do. Stephanie can drop a link in there as well. Our Liberty community are some of our most dedicated supporters. And like I said, make sure you're on our email list. We don't want you to miss out on anything coming up in the future. Thank you all again so much for joining us today. This has been awesome. We feel so fortunate to work alongside all of you and to support the North Korean people in achieving their freedom. Have a good night, a good morning, wherever you are in the world. Have a great day. Bye-bye.